Hello, my name is Professor Hudson, and you're about to view narrated PowerPoint lectures for Chapter 8 on cell respiration. This chapter covers how do cells cover energy, what happens during glycolysis, what happens during cellular respiration, and what happens during fermentation. Most cellular energy is stored in the chemical bonds of energy carrier molecules such as adenosine triphosphate. Cells break down glucose into two stages: glycolysis, which liberates a small quantity of ATP, followed by cellular respiration, which produces far more ATP. Photosynthesis is the ultimate source of energy. Photosynthetic organisms capture the light energy of sunlight and store it in the form of glucose. Nearly all organisms use glycolysis and cellular respiration to break down sugar molecules to capture energy as ATP. This figure is showing the reciprocal nature of photosynthesis and cell respiration. Carbon dioxide and water can be combined through the process of photosynthesis to produce carbohydrates with the release of oxygen as a waste product. This happens in chloroplasts inside of plant leaves. Then, glucose, carbohydrates, and other macromolecules can go through glycolysis and cellular respiration to release energy in the form of ATP, with also the release of carbon dioxide and water as byproducts. Plants can do photosynthesis and cellular respiration, whereas animals can only do cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the process by which living cells obtain energy from organic molecules. The primary aim is to make ATP and NADH. Aerobic respiration uses oxygen. Oxygen is consumed and carbon dioxide is released. Energy is released through cellular respiration to produce ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell. The equation for cellular respiration can sometimes be written as organic molecules, typically a carbohydrate, plus oxygen yield carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Glucose is a key energy storage molecule. All cells metabolize glucose for energy. Plants can convert glucose to sucrose or starch for storage. In humans, energy is stored as long chains of glucose called glycogen or as fat. These storage molecules are converted to glucose to produce ATP for energy. The breakdown of glucose occurs in two phases: glycolysis, which happens in the cytoplasm of the cell, and cellular respiration, which occurs in the mitochondria. During glycolysis and cellular respiration, energy is captured in the form of ATP. This slide is showing you that glucose starts breaking down through glycolysis. If oxygen is available, then it will enter the mitochondria and undergo cellular respiration. If no oxygen is available, then fermentation would be the next step for the glucose molecule. Almost all organisms, whether they reside on land or in the water, carry on cellular respiration, which is most often glucose breakdown coupled to ATP synthesis. This figure is showing how glucose in the presence of oxygen is broken down into carbon dioxide and water, and then the energy that is released from this breakdown of glucose is used to make ATP. Cellular respiration is considered an exergonic reaction which releases energy, and then this energy is used to drive ATP synthesis, which is an endergonic reaction. Remember, when an exergonic reaction releasing energy is coupled to an endergonic reaction for synthesis, we say that is a coupled reaction. Cellular respiration is also an example of a redox reaction. In a redox reaction, You have a molecule that is being oxidized, which means broken down with the loss of electrons and protons. And then you have another molecule which is reduced, which means it gains the electrons and hydrogens. And in a redox reaction, the oxidation and reduction occurs in the same reaction. In cellular respiration, glucose is oxidized into carbon dioxide gas. This occurs as electrons and protons in the form of hydrogen are removed from the glucose molecule. These electrons and hydrogens that are removed from glucose are then added to oxygen, and so then we say oxygen has been reduced. When oxygen gains these electrons and protons in the form of hydrogen, it becomes water. So in cellular respiration, ultimately what is happening is the glucose is oxidized or broken down into carbon dioxide, and then the oxygen is built up or reduced into water. As this process occurs, 36 to 38 ATP total are generated. As we mentioned, the process of cellular respiration occurs in the mitochondria, and oxygen is absolutely required in order to do cellular respiration. Oxygen enters the cell and enters the mitochondria, and carbon dioxide and water, which are waste products from this process, exit. One of the key coenzymes that plays a role in cellular respiration is a molecule called NAD. NAD is a coenzyme that can accept electrons and protons and store them until they're needed. When NAD accepts electrons and protons, it becomes NADH. FAD is another coenzyme that functions in a similar fashion. Glucose metabolism. So let's talk about how you break down glucose. There are two major metabolic pathways in the breakdown of glucose. The first is glycolysis, which does not require oxygen. However, if oxygen is present, then cellular respiration will occur after glycolysis. During cellular respiration, you'll have the breakdown of pyruvate, which is a product from the glycolysis, to acetyl coenzyme A. This is sometimes referred to as the preparatory transition reaction. Then you have the citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle, and then the last stage, which is oxidative phosphorylation via the electron transport chain. As we mentioned previously, glycolysis, which is the first step in breaking down the glucose and converting it to pyruvate, occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell. However, if oxygen is present, that pyruvate from the glycolysis will then enter the mitochondria in order to go through additional breakdown steps. In terms of where everything is occurring, as mentioned previously, glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm, and then the preparatory transition reaction, citric Krebs cycle, occurs in the matrix, and then the electron transport chain with the oxidative phosphorylation occurs in the cristae. The matrix is the jelly-like area in between the folds of the mitochondria, and the cristae are actually the folds. So as mentioned, the complete breakdown of glucose requires glycolysis, and then if there's oxygen present, we will go through the transition or the preparatory reaction, the Krebs cycle, which is also known as the citric acid cycle, and then the electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation. Glycolysis generates a little bit of ATP, but the bulk of the ATP made by the cell occurs during the electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation. Let's talk about glycolysis. In glycolysis, glucose is broken down to 2 molecules of pyruvate, which occurs in the cytoplasm. We use a little bit of ATP to do this process, and then we net 2 ATP plus NADH. NADH is going to store electrons and protons in order to use them later in the process. Now, after glycolysis has occurred, if oxygen is present, cellular respiration can occur. Cellular respiration occurs in 3 stages. This is where the pyruvate made in glycolysis is further broken down, and also will have transfer of electrons and protons to carrier molecules, which will then release them during the electron transport chain to generate ATP by chemiosmosis. Cellular respiration breaks down the 2 pyruvate molecules from glycolysis into 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules. The chemical energy from the pyruvate molecules aids in the production of 32 ATP. Cellular respiration occurs in the mitochondria, which is called the powerhouse of the cell. Organelles specialized for the aerobic breakdown of pyruvate, such as the mitochondria, have 2 membranes. The inner membrane encloses a central compartment containing the fluid matrix, and the outer membrane forms the outer surface of the organelle, and an inner membrane space lies between the 2 membranes. So, the pyruvate made from the glycolysis must be further broken down in order to generate electrons and protons that will be used in the final stages of cell respiration. When we get inside the mitochondria, the preparatory transition reaction can occur where pyruvate enters the matrix and is oxidized, which means further broken down, to form acetyl coenzyme A. Carbon dioxide and NADH are made at this step. Then, acetyl coenzyme A from the previous stage will undergo a series of oxidation reactions where it is further broken down in order to give off more carbon dioxide, produce a little ATP, but ultimately the main goal of this part of the cellular respiration is to gather electrons and protons in the form of NADH and FADH2, which will be used during the electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation. We call this the citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle was discovered by Hans Krebs, and Hans Krebs won the Nobel Prize in 1953 for his discovery of the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is also known as the citric acid cycle because citrate is produced first in the cycle. The Krebs cycle begins by combining acetyl coenzyme A with a 4-carbon molecule to form a 6-carbon citrate, and coenzyme A is released. As the Krebs cycle proceeds, enzymes in the matrix break down the acetyl group, releasing 2 carbon dioxide molecules and regenerating the 4-carbon molecule for use in future cycles. Chemical energy released by breaking down each acetyl group is captured in energy carrier molecules. Each acetyl group produces 1 ATP, 3 NADH, and 1 FADH2. NADH and FADH2 are high-energy electron carriers, which can hold 2 electrons and 2 protons. During the mitochondrial reactions here, carbon dioxide is generated as a waste product, which diffuses out of the cell and into the blood, which carries it into the lungs where it is exhaled. This slide is just showing an additional view of the Krebs cycle along with the transition preparatory reaction. So at this point, we have gone through glycolysis in the first 2 parts of cellular respiration, which would be the transition preparatory reaction and the citric acid, aka Krebs cycle. Now we'll take a break here and we'll pick up in the next segment talking about the last part of cellular respiration, which is the electron transport chain and the oxidative phosphorylation.